Here we go.
So our first major project of Art 2 is what we call our Journey Mandalas. Okay, these are pretty popular and they have been for a while on social media, TikTok, stuff like that. A lot of people are drawing mandalas nowadays. Lots of tutorials out there, lots of different styles and methods and approaches out there. I gave you a little visual aid here, mandalas, right, for pronunciation. I know that word is a little non-specific sometimes for pronunciation. So, the history of mandalas, they started out, we kind of think of traditional mandalas as a spiritual, kind of ritual, very traditional symbol in Asian cultures, okay? They, in that context, are seen as a visual representation of the universe, or they often use it as a guide for meditation and reflection. So the repetition of that design, kind of similar to how Catholics use the rosary and the repetition of the beads and the prayers to kind of keep a prayer journey focused, right, on a particular thing that you repeat. The mandala kind of has a very similar effect in those cultures and a very similar purpose, okay? In Hinduism and Buddhism, the belief is that by entering the mandala, think about if you were a person and the mandala was like a labyrinth garden that you could physically walk into, okay? You enter that and you proceed towards its center, you're guided through a universal transformation. In other words, like from suffering to joy. See how that journey connection kind of fits in there? So the repetition of the rings or the circles of the mandala represent the different steps on your journey. So you kind of, through your journey, you progress a little bit and then you kind of plateau a little bit, right? Then you progress a little bit and then you plateau a little bit. High school and school in general is a lot like this, right? You're a freshman and then you have freshman year. And then you go to sophomore year and then you have sophomore year. You get through that, right? And then you progress a little and so forth. So the idea here is this idea of journey, of transformation, of progress, of growth in some way. Does that make sense? Okay. So these are some what I would consider to be high-level examples, and these would be the complexity that you want to strive for and aim for. Okay? We see, obviously, some pretty precise drawing. This is one of the more precise types of projects that we will work on in Art 2. So normally we would not, normally I don't encourage like tracing, striving for a perfect circle, stuff like that. However, there is definitely an element of measurement and precision because of the repetition. Okay. Now, does your mandala, when you draw it, have to be precisely traced? No, it doesn't. Okay. There's some room for flexibility there. But the complexity is what I want you to see in these examples. So we see lots of layering of repeated shapes. Okay. Each little shape themselves is not particularly difficult or complex or complicated, but what makes it complex and more developed is the repetition and the layering, the combination of how those shapes are paired together. Does that make sense? Okay. We see some diversity also in each of the rings, right? So for example, this one, we see like actual hard-edged circles, right? This one also kind of is dominated by those circles with hard edges. This one, we have one that's a pretty significant circle, but the rest of them, it's a circle of other shapes, right? So the circle itself isn't quite as prominent. This one, same thing. We have one kind of dominant circle, but then as we go out, we see some more variety in those shapes. This one in particular has more like pointed shapes that are repeated. This one has just tons and tons of detail. This one has highlights and shadows and cutouts and stuck on, three-dimensional elements and stuff like that. So within the same concept, there's a lot of different ways you can interpret that and a lot of different ways that you can approach that with as much variety or unity as pertains to your particular journey that you want to choose, okay? In other cultures, we talked about Hinduism, Buddhism, stuff like that. Native American cultures use this idea of this circular form, and they apply it in things like healing circles that are associated with restoring the mind, restoring the body, kind of that journey through going from whatever you're going through to becoming more centered, right? Think of just the term centered refers to that circular analogy, right? Also, we see that in dream catchers. Dream catchers have been trendy in various culturally appropriate or not appropriate ways throughout the last couple of decades. So in Native American culture, they use that to kind of protect the sleeper. That was more of a prevention thing. They were like using that to like call upon spirits and stuff like that for protection rather than documenting a journey, okay? We talked about Hindu and Buddhist cultures using that as a kind of universal symbol, and oftentimes they use that as a path to enlightenment, like they were going to arrive at this particular state and know more, or have a more cognizant, awareness of their life or whatever was going on, okay? There also was that spiritual element, like we said, just like the rosary has the circular repetition, they use that to help develop, as a guide to help develop spirituality as well. And then Chinese, Japanese, Tibetan cultures, we see the idea of that journey, which is what we're going to focus on. So it can either be from one, thinking in the center, to many. So that could be like a growth thing, right? Maybe you start out with a small amount of knowledge and you grow that knowledge in all these directions. Or from many to one. You can start that journey on the outside of the mandala, like we talked about the labyrinth, and as you navigate to the inside of that design, the final stage of that, or the goal, or the celebration, or the achievement might be in the center, okay? So for your designs, as you think about your journey, you can either go from the outside in, or you can design from the outside out, as far as that pertains to what you are symbolizing and communicating. You guys with me so far? Okay. Common symbols. This is one of those things where, because there is so much cultural use of this idea and interpretation of this idea, there are symbols that very commonly show up even across cultures, and they have particular meanings. So, for example, the wheel with 8 spokes typically symbols something like liberation and rebirth. The bell shape, okay, symbolizes openness, emptying of the mind, entrance of wisdom and clarity. Think about like when if you were a cartoon character and you got a good idea, how would that be depicted? You get the light bulb above your head, the little like ding, right? That's the bell. So even in cartoons, they're referencing that same type of symbolism. Triangle, super useful shape in mandalas, because you can do so much with a triangle. You can stylize it, you can flip it, you can repeat it into other things. So when facing upward, meaning the point is going upward, it represents things like action and energy, activity. When it's facing downward, it represents creativity, searching for knowledge, education, that kind of stuff. Do you guys know what the lotus flower is? Right? It's like a repetition of kind of pointy oval shapes. That is a symbol for balance. A lot of different cultures use that one in particular. It can be a symbol for peace and things like that too. The sun symbolizes the universe. It can reference life. It can reference energy. Think about what the sun serves, I should say, in our lives, right? It regulates our day, it provides our schedule, it's repetitive, it provides light, which provides energy, like all sorts of things you can incorporate there. Fire, I like how they say like the burning of ignorance. What's a different way to say that? Education, right? As you learn, as you progress, you burn away ignorance, which is not knowing, right? So it's kind of a different take on that. Diamonds symbolize illumination. You can interpret that in a whole bunch of different ways. Graveyards, that's kind of an interesting thing. We don't think about that a lot. that refers to individual cognition. So I would kind of connect that with that burning of ignorance type of thing, how you are growing in some way, you're becoming more cognitively developed, right? Think about how that would metaphorically and symbolically connect with the idea of a graveyard, leaving something behind, having something die off, something like that. Lotus leaves along with the lotus flower, spiritual rebirth, and then the dot. Think about how simple it is. That's like the simplest art form shape you can pretty much create, right? The next in line would be a line, because it's just a bunch of dots. Okay, so the dot is a symbol free of dimensions. It's that starting point. So a lot of mandalas that you see will have dots either around the outside as a symbol to kind of start on the outside and work your way in, or they'll start with that dot in the middle as the simplest form and as kind of a X marks the spot, start here kind of symbol. Okay. All of those symbols are pretty simple in how they are actually drawn and constructed. But where your individuality and your style and your freedom of choice comes in is how you can depict any of these symbols. And you're not limited to just those symbols either. But think about this. We talked about the sun, right? And how many things that can symbolize. You can depict a sun in all sorts of different ways, right? That one is kind of more formal, kind of feels a little bit more like a compass that would relate and connect to the idea of a journey and direction. This one is a little simpler. This one feels a little more like fire or like burning, so maybe if you want to take it in that direction, right? This one feels totally different than either of those. This one is more playful. Maybe it's symbolizing more childhood or something more active, more lighthearted, right? So by how you design your symbols, that can also affect the meaning of what you're communicating in different points in your journey. Make sense? Okay. Even the idea of, like we talked about triangles, right, or diamonds. You can depict a diamond as like the gemstone, but you can also depict it as the shape. And you could do that with straight edges or with curved edges. You can vary the sizes of them. So even like little tiny changes can have big impact on what you're symbolizing and what you're communicating. Does that all make sense? Okay, so your mandala. Let's boil down what you're actually going to do. Your design and direction is completely up to you. Okay, I left a lot of vagueness for room for your interpretation. So how will you interpret the journey? What journey are you going to do? Is it going to be a really big, long journey? Is it going to be a very narrow, focused journey? Is it going to be somewhere in between? Are you going to depict a journey that is still in progress? Or are you going to depict a journey that has a really defined end point in addition to a really defined start point? Okay? And you can design from the center out, or you can design from the outside in, so that the viewers can go in either direction that makes sense. Figure out what makes more sense for your journey, right? You're going to choose or create symbols that have meaning for you, okay? I realize that this is a project that does lean more towards a more personal nature, so we are going to share these. If you don't want to share every single symbol, I understand that, that's okay, but do be prepared to share at least some of your symbolism so that we can get a sense for why you designed what you did and how that relates to your message. Please do, we talked about dream catchers and how through time they have been kind of trendified, for lack of a better word, and sometimes that can be respectful to that culture and sometimes that can really not be respectful. Considering all of the different cultures that use mandalas in some form for some pretty important purposes, right? Spirituality, enlightenment, like we're talking pretty serious stuff. Just be sensitive and respectful to what might be meaningful to other cultures, okay? Be aware of that. Look stuff up if you have to. So for today, where you're going to start is you're going to brainstorm and doodle, okay? Don't hold back today, just kind of brain dump and write down and sketch out, plan out, or not plan out, but try out whatever comes to your mind, right? You're going to kind of think about perhaps different journeys that you might want to consider. You might want to think about particular symbols or particular points of those journeys that might be options for you. You don't have to commit to anything today, but I do want you to kind of experiment and try out some stuff, okay? And then when we circle back tomorrow, you can kind of re-look at your ideas, do some refining, make some decisions, and then we'll go from there, okay? With this project, I'm going to give you a heads up. If you have like a set of markers, particularly if it's like a finer point set, people tend to like using that material. You can use whatever you want. I'm going to leave it open-ended for you. I have colored paper, I have white paper. I do have a couple sets of paint markers that we will share amongst the class if you want to use that. You can also use watercolor, you can use acrylic. We have lots of options here. But if you have something at home that you think would lend itself to this and you want to bring that in and use that, I'm telling you now so you can be prepared for that. Okay? Questions? I'm going to leave these up for you so you can get some inspiration. We have until 9:32 today, so you got 17 more minutes. That's pretty good.